Welcome to my lesson today. Okay, so yesterday we talked about language awareness, and basically we were learning how language works. And we know that we can use different approaches to teaching um, a language or English language. We could use the functional approach, that is, using the language, teaching the language on the basis of the learner's need to communicate, focusing on their purpose for communication. So if a boy is standing by the roadside and he accidentally hits another person, he would say, the exponent he would say is, "Oh, excuse me," or "I'm sorry." So the situation or the context is he was by the road or he's by the road, he's standing and then someone passes by and he accidentally steps on their toes and he says, "I'm sorry." That's the exponent. And the function of that is to apologize. Okay, so that's the functional approach. We can also use phonology. Now, in using phonology means a focus on pronunciation. A lot of the times we use drills. Repeat after me. The boy sat on the wall. The boy sat on the wall. Everybody, the boy sat on the wall. So that's called a choral drill, when the whole class follows after the teacher. So I'm demonstrating it right now to you. The boy sat on the wall. Everybody, the boy sat on the wall. Okay. I can also use another technique, in phonology. I could use my fingers as a guide to teach contraction. You cannot stay. So this is what we do. You cannot stay here. You cannot stay here. Contraction. So sorry, that's not a drill, but I'm going to teach you. It's part of pronunciation or phonology. You can't stay here. You can't stay here. I'll take it again. You cannot stay here. You cannot stay here. You can't stay here. So that's a technique for teaching contraction. Okay? So with drills, when you're teaching phonology, the teacher models the sound and asks the students to repeat after her. You can't stay here. Repeat. Everybody says, you can't stay here. You can't stay here. Repeat. You can't stay here. That's a choral drill. Yesterday, we talked about a transformational drill, which we use in grammar or we could use for pronunciation. Okay, so a transformation drill, I could ask the students to repeat after me, but change one word in the sentence. So we're practicing. Okay, so if we were using maybe an adverb, we're learning adverbs, and we're practicing, I could say something like, the man walked quickly. And then I can ask somebody else to say it, and they transform it by saying, the man walked slowly. Somebody else says, the man walked happily. That's a transformational drill. So you can transform sentences by changing a word in the sentence. Okay, so there are different things we can do. We can do the choral drill, transformational drill, and so many other activities. We can also learn English using lexis. Lexis is at the word level. And yesterday we learned that in teaching English, we're focusing on word building or in vocabulary building. All right, so we can teach vocabulary. For example, you can teach the vocabulary for travel. You can decide that you want to teach idioms. So that is focusing on lexis. You can teach affixes, which is teaching people about root words and then how you can develop that word using either a prefix or a suffix. So we have to do, and then we could have doable or undo. So doable becomes a word with a suffix. Undo is a word with a prefix. So remember the functional approach, phonology, lexical approach, and of course, good old grammar, which most English teachers are used to. So we learned that yesterday. We also learned yesterday about how children learn language. And part of what we learned yesterday was that there is what we call a silent period. In the natural way of learning language, a baby is born and the child is exposed to the language. That's a technical term, exposure. So you expose the child to the language, and the child goes through a silent period where they're not talking, they're listening to the language. And then, because they have a need to interact, they begin to pick up the language. That's the technical term, pick up the language. And they begin to try out the language by speaking. And older people or adults praise the child. They don't correct the child the same way you correct a child in a classroom. You know, they praise the child. Oh, you're doing great. Great. Well done. Hi, you can speak, So there's a different way of learning a language or English language, as L1 or mother tongue. And there's a different technique for learning it as L2 or second language. We learned that in the classroom, there's a different approach. And what we're trying to do is, can we take the natural methods and adapt them in our classroom by emphasizing exposure to the language, encouraging learners to speak the language, to experiment, to try it out. So at some level, we're not keen on correcting their grammar because we want them to produce the language, unless we are in a grammar class or unless it is the focus to check grammatical errors or punctuations and things like that. We want to encourage the learner to try out the language as much as possible. Okay, so the grammar approach, the lexical approach, phonology, or the functional approach. And with grammar, we're looking at structure, whole sentences. And with grammar, we like to use controlled practice. We restrict the learner because we want the learner to not go off the boundaries we set for them. So, for example, we ask the learner to do a transformational drill. So we restrict the learner to one part of the sentence as a whole unit, and then they change only one part. Or else, in filling the gaps, you control the learner with a sentence, and they have to fill in the gap with one out of several options. So that's controlled practice. But we have what is called freer practice, which will occur in one of our slides today. So let's go on with our learning. So there's another approach to English language teaching, and that approach is teaching using the 4 basic skills: reading, listening, writing, and speaking. That's what we're going to do in this slide. So, as a rehearsal, we have different approaches to teaching English. We have the 4, which has a direct language focus, function, grammar, phonology, and lexis. So different levels: pronunciation, the level of the word, the level of sentence, and then the level of functionality. Why are we teaching this? What does the learner need to do? What is his reason for using the language? Now, when we look at the basic skills, we can also teach the 4 basic skills within the same context of the functional approach. We can use a skills focus, we can use a grammar focus, we can use the lexical approach if we like, and then focus on the learner's experience. Very, very important. So there are 4 basic skills in language. Any language is listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And we can teach English using that approach. These 4 skills work together. So, as language teachers or subject teachers, language is so fundamental in what we do in the classroom. So, we must ensure that in our classrooms, the 4 skills are going hand in hand. You ask someone to come and demonstrate something or give a presentation, and all the learners are listening. At the same time, they may be taking notes, or you give an activity that is written, and there's an activity that involves reading. So we like to use the four skills together. I am speaking, I'm um, reading at this point. I haven't started writing, so I'm a little bit restricted here. But in a classroom, we would like to have the four together because I could very well use all four skills together at the same time. Now, there are receptive skills, and I wonder if anyone can identify what receptive skills are. Amongst the basic skills, we have productive skills and we have receptive skills. With receptive skills, language is not being produced, language is being received, hence the use of the word receptive. Now, from the four skills that I just showed you, can someone identify for me quickly one or two of the receptive skills? On the chat, please tell me what you think. Is it speaking? Is it reading? Is it listening? Is it writing? Which is a receptive skill? A receptive skill requires comprehension. It requires understanding of meaning. So if you're a language teacher, it's not just teaching language, but do the students understand what you're teaching? Do they know the meaning? If you're a subject teacher, if you're teaching maths, for example, before they can do the maths, do they understand the language of mathematics? Are there certain vocabulary that you need to teach before they can flow along in that lesson? Okay, so two people have said listening is a receptive skill. Thank you. There's one more receptive skill. One more. Waiting. There are four basic skills. If listening is one of the receptive skills, like you are receiving what I am saying, you're listening. Someone's given the second one as reading. Thank you very much. Well done, everyone. Thank you. So we have receptive skills and we have productive skills. And this understanding is very, very important. Receptive and productive skills. So we receive language and we produce language. So when you're doing a grammar class, what do you want your students to do? Do you want them to listen or to receive language or to produce language? Or do you want both ways? Now, ideally, you should have the listening and the speaking skills working together in any lesson, especially in a language lesson. Okay? So it means then, guided by this knowledge, you can create activities that suit you. Productive skills are when the skills that require language to be produced. And I'd like for anyone to write out any of the two productive skills for me in the chat. It requires fluency to produce language. It requires creativity. What is the best expression I can use to describe a young girl who looks so beautiful? So it requires creativity. Oh, your eyes are as beautiful as the stars. I need creativity. It may require the knowledge of language rules. So in grammar, we can produce language, for example, in a transformational drill. Okay, it requires vocabulary and it requires communication. We need to communicate. So I'm looking at the answers. Somebody says, two people say the productive skills are speaking. Speaking and what? There are two receptive skills and there are two productive skills. So give me the second productive skill. You're right, speaking is a productive skill. Writing, thank you very much. Writing is a productive skill. So you see, our knowledge of those two skills can guide what we do in our classrooms. Now, the fact that someone is listening to me does not mean they're exactly passive, okay? But just remember that we need to learn how to produce, we need to learn how to listen, or read and learn how to write. We produce language by speaking or writing, and we receive language by listening or reading. Remember, we talked about the silent period when the child, a young baby, begins to listen to the language that flows around them. and begins to listen until they begin to acquire an understanding of the language. And they begin to acquire the language structure in such a way that when they start speaking, they can communicate. It may not be perfect, but the more they listen to the language, the more their expressions become more correct. So it means then, that learners can understand the rules. They may be able to um, use the rules of a language without knowing exactly what they are. They can integrate it into learning. Okay, so it means basically that we need to be able to differentiate between the productive and the um, receptive skills and use them well in planning any lesson. Okay, but in English, remember, we like to have the four skills working together in any classroom. When they work together, then we increase the chances of different learning preferences being at work. Visualizing, the student might be drawing, and or writing. Some people like those who are visual learners, they like to write because as they write, they remember. Okay. Visualizing, listening, auditory learners, visual learners, and kinesthetic learners, learners who like to do activities. So, reading and listening are receptive skills. For example, a text is made of words and sentences, so we can read the text. Connected text is also called a discourse. Okay, so a discourse could be a conversation between you and I on a particular topic. It's connected by grammar, vocabulary, and our knowledge of the world. So you see, everything we do in our classrooms is interpreted by our knowledge of the world. And because I'm teaching TKT, not only with a focus on language teaching, I need to always fall back on the fact that language is fundamental for teaching any subject. And so, if we can understand language because of our understanding or our knowledge of the world, then it means that in another situation, doing a complex subject or an abstract subject, we need the knowledge of the world to understand what is being taught. That's why we use the learner's experience of the world, if you like. So, if we're going to teach measurements, can we teach it using a tape rule that a learner might know? Or can we use it by checking heights of learners, using familiar things to teach the learner about what they want to learn? So, with receptive skills, we have the text. Our text can be words or sentences. We have discourse or connected text. That's another name for a discourse. That's a text of maybe sentences or an oral text, with grammatical sequence, with vocabulary, and of course, it's meaningful. So there's the knowledge of the world. To understand, the reader needs to understand all of these connections. Okay, so reading is helped by coherence. That's a word you need to check, coherence. And it is also helped by cohesion. Coherence, the sequence, the order. When we're writing, paragraphing, paragraph by paragraph, and we know that a sentence is a paragraph is a group of sentences that has one main idea. So it has to be coherent. So we start with a topic sentence, and every other sentence in that paragraph is referring to the topic that is being discussed in that paragraph. And we have a sequence, which is speaking about coherence. Cohesion, I like to describe cohesion as the glue that joins words together or sentences or phrases together. So, for examples, your conjunctions, your linkers, or your connectors. Okay, so those are examples of cohesion. So, for a learner to be able to speak correctly, they have to be coherent and they have to use cohesion. Okay, so if I'm speaking, I have to order my speech in such a way that I'm going sequence by sequence. I don't talk about the last thing I did in the morning when I want to describe the first thing I did in the morning. So I have to have an order. And sometimes we have a chronological order. But of course, in literature, we can do flashbacks and things like that. We have poetic license and things like that. But generally, we must teach our learners about coherence and cohesion. So those are the things that I just talked about, some very, very fundamental aspects of reading or listening. Those are the important things that we need to focus on. Now I'm going to go a little further.